towards pages 11 and 12. So with the help of the traders among the nation, the Gentiles will be able to pollute the sanctuary, destroy Jerusalem, the holy city, and take away the daily sacrifice. Daniel 11:31 tells us, armed shall stand on his part, meaning he'll have a military force on his side to destroy the sanctuary and the city. The outer court of the temple and the holy city are given to the Gentiles to trodden down for 42 months. So the time span, or the times that we're dealing with in this segment, is 1,290 days and 42 months. So pages 11 and 12 deal with time and Gentiles. So again, the specified time here is 1,290 days and 42 months. The specific events that should be happening in that period of time is daily sacrifice, polluting the sanctuary, treading the holy city, abomination of desolation, Jerusalem shall be trodden down. The verses provided in this section specifically deal with the Gentiles stopping the daily sacrifice, polluting the sanctuary, and treading down the holy city, Jerusalem. These events are given 1,290 days or 42 months. Now, something to take note of. Here's something to notice and not confuse. Even though 1,290 days and 42 months is 3.5 years, it's not associated with the verses that state 3.5 years or time, times, and half a times. These are two separate events. You know this based on the context and details provided. Another specified period of time to take note of is 2,300 days. This deals specifically with the cleansing of the temple in Daniel chapter 8, verses 13 through 14. Some more time markers that we have. First, we have the daily sacrifices mentioned. Then, the transgression of desolation in the sanctuary and the host both trodden underfoot. Daniel 11 and Daniel 12 give us more context on these key markers. So Daniel chapter 12 verses 11 through 12 tell us that stopping the daily sacrifice starts the clock on 1,290 days to when the abomination of desolation is set up. Daniel 11:31, when you pair that with Daniel 8 verses 13 through 14, it tells us that removing the daily sacrifice starts the clock on polluting the sanctuary. Therefore, the answer where it talks about the sanctuary being polluted also starts the clock on how long it will take to cleanse the sanctuary of the pollution. So in other words, two clocks are starting at the same time. One clock is for the Gentiles of 1,290 days or 42 months. The other clock is to cleanse, which will take 2,300 days. Another specified time to note is the special blessing for those who make it 45 days after the 1,290 days. The 1,290 days is the time when the Gentiles destroy the city, the sanctuary, and so forth. So it sounds like that's the time of the Gentiles. But there is a blessing to those, or the one that makes it to 1,335 days. So whoever the people are that make it 45 days after the 1,290 days, which brings you to the 1,335th day, there's going to be a blessing. Next, we have pages 12 through 14. What happens during the 1,290 days of the Gentile purge, rampage, and destruction? So, key points that is the reason for why these scriptures are paired together the way they are. Again, it's really just in the details provided. What you're going to notice is it addresses the holy temple being defiled, which is mentioned in Psalm 79 in the first verse. And a lot of the events that are mentioned in these scriptures are the same things that are addressed with the 1,290 days, which is the time of the Gentiles trotting down the city. So those events, like I stated, you're going to see them listed in the other verses paralleled as well, mentioning the holy temple being defiled, Jerusalem being laid on heaps, avenging the blood of the saints. They're addressing Jacob, which deals with the time of Jacob's trouble. These verses, like I stated, were put together based on the details provided and in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, which these other verses are coming from other witnesses, from the writers. In the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses shall every word be established. 2 Corinthians 13:1. So it was affirmed from paralleling scripture with scripture, in other words. So next we're going to go to pages 14 through 15. And this deals with fleeing to the wilderness. The next time marker of events is when Israel flees into the wilderness. Again, this order is determined based on the details provided. Now remember, previously using the scriptural details, we were told about, first, the daily sacrifice is stopped. Second, 1,290 days pass, which we just looked at what happens during that 1,290 days. And lastly, or third, the abomination of desolation is set up. Yeshua himself gives us the next time marker for the next event. He says, when you see the abomination of desolation, those in Judea must flee to the mountains. Therefore, we know that after the 1,290 days, the abomination of desolation is set up, and then the Israelites in Judea flee to the mountains. Let's go ahead and recap. And recapping kind of helps us kind of keep it all together, because I know it's a lot of details, so it keeps us from getting lost in all the information. So like I said, let's go ahead and recap to make sure that we're not getting lost in the details. But we're going to be going a little bit further back to when the Israelites were surrounded in the holy city. So first, they're surrounded by their enemies. Second, they kind of come to a climactic point in their pain and suffering before their deliverance. And that climactic point for them comes during the time where they're in that 1,290 days where the Gentiles have their time to run amok. The city is being destroyed because of the Gentiles, the temple's being polluted, and they are in the period of 1,290 days of trouble. Third, you have the abomination of desolation that gets set up after that. And fourth, the beast magnifies himself above all that is Elohim. Also, notice it said those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. This lets you know not all the Israelites are in the same place. When we started, we saw the Israelites in captivity in 7 different locations in Asia Minor, which is modern-day Turkey. Then we saw the holy city Jerusalem trodden down and purged. And here we're told those in Judea. Scripture states those in Judea gives the understanding that all the Israelites are not in the same place. It's not clear. I get the impression that all of the Israelites, or whoever can flee, does flee. But don't quote me on that, because I don't exactly see that in Scripture. But what's specific, though, is that those who are in Judea are given specific instructions to flee to the mountains. So that does not necessarily mean that Israelites who are in other locations shouldn't flee. It's just those who are in Judea, when they flee, they're told to go to the mountains. Where the other Israelites who are scattered in the diaspora, where they are and where they can flee, that's not been specified, but it doesn't mean that they wouldn't be able to flee. Now, like I said, the ones that are in Judea are going to flee to the mountains. And in Zechariah 14:5, it gives more specifics about fleeing to the valley of the mountains, which extends to Azal. Continuing on pages 15 through 16. So as we progressively move forward, I'd like to point out that There were some challenges that I had during this process. The challenge that I faced was trying to put the verses in an exact order with limited spacing. I wanted the document to be something that wasn't too cumbersome, something that you didn't have to print on like legal paper or on like a huge map. So it was a challenge in certain areas because the flow may appear to be disrupted when you look at certain verses, but it's not. It's just that it was more feasible to display in the order that it's in on this document. All right, so I'm going to explain this as best as possible. This part is dealing with an unpopular topic that makes people uneasy, but I have to talk about it. So, like I stated, Israel's birth pains, they intensified to the point where a mass majority or a good number of them were killed by the masses, and they were placed in a valley. And that's addressed in Psalms 79, verses 1 through 3, more specifically in verse 3, and it's affirmed and confirmed in Ezekiel 37. This is why Scripture says that unless those days be shortened, no flesh would survive. So when we see the abomination desolation, it goes up, they're told to flee. And whosoever can make it 45 days past the 1,290 days, that's 45 days after the abomination of desolation, there will be a blessing. All right, so continuing from 16 to 17, Israel's fleeing from their persecution is a form of deliverance from their birth pains and sufferings at the hand of the Gentiles. I say it's a form of deliverance because this isn't the deliverance of the whole nation. Not yet. As we keep going, I'll explain, but first I want to point out the complexity of the things that are happening when we see Revelation 12 verse 5. I'm not going to address everything I see in Revelation 12 verse 5 right now because it would require separate videos to address and explain these events. There are some things I'm aware of and some things I'm speculating about, but I can't present them at this time because I don't have enough evidence and information to address it. Therefore, this one can't be addressed fully right now. What I can address is Israel's crying out in pain and suffering is what brings about their deliverance, deliverance from their situation. This is just going off of Revelation 12 verse 5. These are one of the moments when I lean not on my own understanding, but have faith in what Scripture says. So, Satan will ascend into heaven, the Shamayim, in an effort to exalt his throne above the stars of Yahuwah, which makes you wonder what inspired the title Star Wars. Clearly, this caused war, which is pointed out in Revelation 12 verse 7. So this brings me to something else to address. So we've been taught that Satan was kicked out of heaven, but I think we're a little unclear on some things. Clearly, Satan and his angels have fallen, because Genesis tells us about the fallen angels, and we have to wonder why Satan was in the garden. But if we keep reading past Genesis, we see that Satan, who is the accuser of the brethren, and other demons, spirits, what have you, they also go back and forth to heaven. So, although they've fallen, there is still a place for them in heaven. That's why Yahuwah was able to send a lying spirit. This is how he is able to ascend into heaven and make war. So, in other words, even though he fell in Genesis, he's still able to ascend and go into heaven and make war because he still has access. He fell, yes, but he was not permanently removed. There clearly was still a place for him. So that's how he was able to ascend to heaven and make war. He and his fallen angels still had access to heaven. Satan ascends into heaven. He and his angels fight against Michael and his angels. Then we have the seventh seal that is broken. This seal deals with the silence in heaven. We also see 7 angels prepare for judgment as they are given 7 trumpets. This was paralleled with Zechariah chapter 2, verse 13, due to the silence and the rising up out of the holy habitation. Other parallel verses to consider concerning the silence, judgment, and redemption of Israel are going to be Isaiah 41, verse 1, Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 20, and Zephaniah chapter 1, verse 7. Also, we see Satan and his angels went up to heaven and made war in heaven. Clearly, this would also be a reason to demand silence, to make everything stop, which kind of builds like this intense moment. The 7 angels are given 7 trumpets and 7 bowls, and they're sent on their way. Now on page 18, we see the 7 angels go their way and prepare to sound, but are told not to until the 144,000 are sealed. 4 angels hold back the wind until the 144,000 have been sealed. So on page 19, after this, we see the first trumpet to sound. It's the 3rd angel who sounds the first trumpet. We know this by the details provided. So first detail in Revelation chapter 8 is the 3rd angel sounded. So that alone tells us which angel it was. It was the 3rd angel. The second detail says the great star fell from heaven called wormwood that turned the waters bitter. So notice, a great star fell from heaven called wormwood. It turned the waters bitter. The great star tells us this isn't any star. It's Satan. We know it's him because he fell from heaven. He was just in heaven with the angels making war. Heaven was silenced, then he and his angels were kicked out of heaven. This is affirmed in Revelation chapter 12, verse 7 and 9, 13, and in Isaiah verse 14, 12. So his numerous names are affirmed, from the devil to Satan, that old serpent, the great dragon, Lucifer, and even the great star wormwood. When I was researching this passage concerning wormwood, the verse was cross-referenced with Ruth chapter 1 verse 20. It goes like this. And she said unto them, Call me not Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty hath dealt very bitterly with me. Now, initially, that didn't make sense on why that was cross-referenced until I understood that Yahuwah dealt bitterly with Satan. He was cast to the earth bitterly. As we see in Revelation 12, verse 8, there is no longer a place in heaven for him, for Satan and his angels. Genesis tells us he fell from heaven. They're fallen angels. But we know that from Genesis all throughout Scripture, they had access to go to and fro. That's how he was the accuser of brethren. He was going back and forth. He had access. So Revelations seals the deal by saying that after that war, he was kicked out permanently. He had no more access. There was no more place found for him in heaven. So it appears that even though he fell, there was a place for him. That was no more. Also, Satan himself was very bitter. So not only did Yahuwah deal with him bitterly, Satan himself was very bitter, thus turning the waters bitter. And the waters were bitter enough to kill people who drank it. This is the same waters he spews out of his mouth at the woman in Revelation 12, 15 through 16. And the bitter waters were also a punishment and judgment on the wicked people. So it's like you're killing a couple of birds with one stone. Other references would be Jeremiah 8:14 and Jeremiah 9:15.